Good evening. My name is Victoria Tishman Camerzell. My pronouns are she, hers. I am speaking to you from Alameda County, home to the traditional territory of the Ohlone people. Please save all questions for the end of the presentation. We are so happy to host writer and hiking expert Susan Alcorn with us tonight. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Susan was born in Oregon, but has lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for most of her life. She has been a member of the Sierra Club for at least 35 years. Susan often writes about the myriad benefits of hiking. Her most recent book on hiking is entitled Walk, Hike, Saunter. Seasoned women hikers share tales and trails. Each chapter features a different woman, focusing on 32 amazing female hikers who share their adventures, accomplishments, and the rewards and challenges of walking and hiking. Susan met her husband on a Sierra Club trip over 40 years ago. Susan retired from teaching elementary school in 2001, which provided the couple with even more time for hiking, backpacking, and other travel. All of Susan's hiking books were written after she took up backpacking at the age of 48. They offer encouragement and support for backpackers and long distance hikers of all ages and levels. We're going to start the conversation talking with each other, and then we're going to open up the conversation to any comments from the audience or questions via chat. Susan, again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to meet you, Victoria.
Likewise. Thank you, Susan. And could you get us started by telling us how you got interested in hiking?
I've always liked the outdoors, and I've often walked. In fact, I used to walk to and from school, even when I was still going to high school and all that. And after I got married, we didn't have much money, but this is my first marriage. We didn't have much money, but we definitely could take our kids camping, and so we camped up and down mostly the West Coast, and did lots of hiking in conjunction with that. And it wasn't until I got divorced in my early 40s that I decided I didn't want to sit home and feel sorry for myself about all this. I was going to get out there and meet new people. And so I got very involved with the local chapter, the Bay chapter of the Sierra Club. And I went on their Saturdays, their weekend hikes, usually the 2B hikes, which many of you probably know, but those are like the 5 to 10 mile hikes, probably 1,000 to 2,000 feet elevation, gradual, and so on. And they took me all over the Bay Area. So I had been a lot of places around here, but I hadn't really explored trails like in Point Reyes and that kind of thing. So did that. And I also went up to Clairetapan, which is a Sierra Club lodge in the Sierra, and learned how to cross-country ski. I went on a very special trip with the main Sierra Club that took us to Alaska and to Kauai. So, I mean, I was really into the Sierra Club. But I didn't know anything about backpacking. I mean, I knew of it, but I had never done it. And yes.
And Susan, could you tell us what happened on your first night backpacking?
My first night backpacking, this was after I met my husband in Baja and went down to go whale watching with the Sierra Club. And it was really love at first sight. We had car caravan down. It ended up with me coming home with him and in his pickup truck with the camper shell on the back. Me having my passenger I went down there with drive my car back. And we have been together ever since. So that was about 35 years ago. So we were married a year after we met, and I wanted to go backpacking. That's what people have been talking about on all these hikes, backpacking. And I thought, that's really cool. You can go for a walk and you don't have to come home. You're at this great place and you get to stay over. And I just thought that would be lots of fun. And so I learned more about the John Muir Trail, and I learned that Mount Whitney is a walk-up peak, which means you don't need technical skills. You just do a difficult hike. So when I met Ralph, he had grown up in Yellowstone National Park, and his father was a naturalist ranger. And so Ralph had a lot of backpacking experience. And so I immediately started campaigning for being able to go to Mount Whitney. And I would have crawled up that trail if I had to. But anyway, it all started with us driving from here, the Bay Area, to the other side of the Sierras, and going up to a trailhead north of Mount Whitney, the Kearsarge Pass. We drove over there in one day, camped out, and then the first day started, first hiking day started, up the hill. And still we're short of the pass, but there was a really neat place that we could camp. No one else around. It was above the timberline. And we decided that, well, I wasn't too sure about the whole bear thing because I was acquainted with bears and campgrounds, but since we were the only people there, and this was pre bear canisters, my husband convinced me that it would be perfectly fine to set our backpacks against a nearby log. Normally, what we would have done was hang the food with a rope from a tree branch. Well, above timberline, there are not a lot of trees where you can hang anything. So anyway, we lean against the tree, the down tree, and go to bed. 1 or 2 in the morning, we awake to this sound of scuffling outside the tent, hearing my pack or a pack being dragged away. And we didn't have to look to know that it was a bear that was out there. We only had at that time like a pen light because they hadn't come up with headlamps yet. So you couldn't see very much. But when we did finally open the tent to see what was going on after he'd heard the bear leave, and it had been a while, we looked out and saw that my backpack was about 20 feet away, and the bear had presumably left, but we weren't sure. So Ralph said, well, we'll survey the damage in the morning. And he went back to sleep. I don't think I went back to sleep. But and that's sort of the story of our life, right? He goes back to sleep. I'm awake. Anyway, the next morning we got up, looked at the pack, which incidentally was my sister-in-law's pack, ripped pockets on it, drool on it. I had not exactly followed the rules because I knew what I was supposed to pack and we knew about the food, but I had decided that it would be really fun to have a chunky chocolate bar and some salami and cheese that I would stick in my pack as a surprise one of the days. That was gone. The milkman, which is dry milk, those packets had tooth marks in them, although I guess the bear didn't care for that, so most of that was left. But anyway, it was kind of scattered what was left and what was gone. So we did an inventory and had to decide whether we could continue because it was going to be another week or so before we got to Whitney. We decided we had enough to make it, and so we resumed our walk, and eventually did get to Whitney and all that. And along the way, we met a couple of other people, and we shared our story as one does on the trail. One guy had a plastic container of malted milk balls, a chocolate, candy. gave that to us because he was on his way out. Somebody else said his wife had packed his pack for him as far as the food, and he had canned goods that he was taking out with him. And we said, no, I don't think so. You know, that's we don't want to carry canned goods too heavy. So anyway, that was my first time, my first night of backpacking.
I think it's very impressive that your first experience backpacking, you encountered a bear, and that wasn't your last experience backpacking. Um, could you tell us why you wrote your first hiking book?
Well, after that first trip, we kept going back mostly to the Sierra, doing different trips. And at some point, I realized I wasn't seeing, well, it was nowhere near as popular as it is now, or as busy as it was now. And we weren't seeing all that many people. We did tend to go in the shoulder season. So we tended to go in September, later in the year, not during the summers. But not only were we not seeing many people, I was seeing very few women comparatively, whereas now I think it's probably 50-50. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but there were fewer women than there were men. And the women I was seeing were not of my age. And at that time I was, 40, I'm trying to think, 48, I think. But I thought, this is crazy. I'm not the only woman that's out here. And so I just decided, what the heck, I'm going to find out who else is out here. So I started collecting names. I was actually at that time volunteering at the Sierra Club bookstore, which used to be on College in Berkeley. And so I think I recall asking there, who do you know that would be 45 or older, because I want to talk to them. And then just by word of mouth, I started gathering names, and eventually came up for that book also. That was the We're in the Mountains, Not Over the Hill book. About 32 women for that book too. And I would call them on the phone and have a series of questions, and eventually put it together, and we independently published that book. And so that was the first backpacking book that I wrote.
And your most recent backpacking book, it tells a lot of stories about women who have completed the Triple Crown of hiking. Could you explain what that is, what that achievement is, and why so few people have achieved it?
Those that have done the Pacific Crest, the Continental Divide, and the Appalachian Trail, which is, I may need being correct, it's about 7,500 miles. These are three of the country's wilderness scenic trails. And if somebody accomplishes that, there's an award called the Triple Crown of Hiking that the American Long Distance Hiking Association West gives to those people. And it's obviously quite an achievement. When I started the book, actually, it's, and I'm going to show it to you if you can see it there. I actually, in this book, didn't want to talk just to backpackers. I wanted to include those that might do something as kind of normal as, walk their dog daily or try to get their 10,000 steps. And I wanted more of a cross section than just backpackers. But I didn't really know most of the women that I ended up interviewing. And so I didn't really know their stories. And little did I realize that I was going to find in those 32 women, 5 of them who had achieved that Triple Crown of hiking, which is amazing. And whether it was those that did that or those that, did more usual kinds of hiking, around town or in the Sierra or wherever. I wanted to do a cross section of all those people. And I also, in this case, wanted everyone to be 45 or older, because I had this thing about, it's ridiculous to think that you have to stop hiking because you're in your 40s or, older. You can go as long as you want to be going. And so it's just always been kind of my husband and my belief that we should be supporting women doing that, because it's brought a lot of joy to us. I like encouraging others to keep doing it and not feel like this is something that they don't have a right to.
I really love that about all of your books, is that you speak to considerations for people 40 and over, and you really create this inclusive culture, I think, through your work. And thank you for for doing that for folks. One of the things on your website too that you talk about is hiking the Camino de Santiago. I have a former mentor and boss who's actually here on the Zoom call with us, who retired wanting to hike the Camino de Santiago. For folks like Arcadio, who are retired and would like to, plan for a pilgrimage like this, are there some considerations that they may, want to take into mind?
Are you referring to do with age, or just planning for this trip?
Both, please.
Okay. Well, the Camino de Santiago is a pilgrimage trail that people have been doing in Spain primarily for about 1,000 years, to get to the west coast to Santiago de Compostela, where there's a cathedral, and so that's kind of the destination. People have walked from places throughout Europe to get to this pilgrimage site. And so they can start wherever they want. And many people, I mean, especially in the early days, people would walk from their home, wherever it was. It could be in, Belgium, it could be in England. Of course, that takes a little more than just walking, but people came from the Netherlands. They came from all over to get there, and they didn't just walk there and fly home. They walked there and they walked back home, obviously. But over time, as people started going through certain trails, services grew to accommodate these people that were going. I mean, millions of people. So places to stay, for shelter, places to eat, and so on along the way. So today, the most popular of those routes starts in the Pyrenees, on the border of France and Spain, comes over the Pyrenees, goes about 500 miles across to the west coast to Santiago. And so that's the major trail. But the second most popular trail actually starts in Porto, in Portugal. There are 4 major trails in France, one from Paris, Arles, Vézelay, and Le Puy. And actually, Ralph and I have done 3 of those routes, and each one of them is about, averages about 500 miles to get to the border of, the Pyrenees again. But there are other trails. There's a trail along the northern coast called the Norte and the Primitivo. Those are both early trails in Spain. So we have done many of these trails because it's just an incredible way to really be in a culture, rather than just kind of feeling like you're a sightseer.
And are all the trails inclusive to folks of all levels, or does one need to sort of condition oneself before going? What is that process like?
Well, I always recommend doing some training for whatever hike and whatever conditions you think you're going to find. Now, some of the trails are much more difficult than others, but I'm a believer, whether it's here or there, that if you've trained some, your first days in particular are going to go a lot more smoothly than if you just suddenly, get dropped off in some mountainous terrain and have to make your way through it. So you're going to train one way or another. But also, if you don't do any preparation, you're much more likely to have some kind of injury. So I sort of believe in starting where you are, increasing your mileage, perhaps increasing your pace, what kind of elevation you're going to be doing, you add to that gradually. Whatever you're going to carry, start adding to that weight, and go into it gradually, rather than suddenly get dropped off in the middle of some country. But that said, a lot of people do it without any kind of training, and some do just fine, others have injuries. But there's no requirement that says you have to start, 1,000 miles away. If you want to get the certificate of completion, the Compostela in Santiago, which is, a holding piece of paper that says, you've done this particular thing. The requirement is that you hike or ride a horse the last 100 kilometers, which is about 60 miles. So you don't need to start back in France. You can start at one of the towns closer in, and many people do. They start in a place called Sarria in Spain, and they do that last 60 miles. So it really, it just depends on what you want, what kind of experience you want to have. I wanted to add, a lot of people also have their luggage because it is so well developed on many of the routes. There are basically, like shuttle services that will carry your backpack for you. So you would need to carry your day pack with your rain gear if it looked like you need it, but your snacks and water and so on. But if you have both your luggage, you can get it carried that way, which we've never done, but many people do. So another way to make it work.
What's the best time of year to do the hike?
Oh, for me, shoulder season. We have done all of them, I think, in April, May, sometimes into June or September, October. And that's in part because of the heat in the summer, and also because Europeans tend to take their long vacations in August. So, and I'm not a hot weather fan, so I can deal with rain if I have to, much more than I can deal with heat. But yeah, so that's my advice.
And what should one look for in a hiking partner?
A hiking partner. I think if it's someone you're just newly getting acquainted with, you want to be sure that they understand what your limitations are, what your abilities are. So if you're brand new to it, there's a lot you can learn from hiking with other people, but you want to be sure that they're going to listen to what you need. There are people that are early birds that like to get up really early, obviously. There are people like me who prefer to sleep in. So I have the best of both worlds, because Ralph likes to get up early and I don't. So he gets up early and fixes my tea and serves it to me in our tent. And then I can get going. It's important to consider, what kind of miles does the other person want to do? How often do they like to stop? Do they want to hike at nighttime with their headlamp because it's going to be hot during the day somewhere or another? You really need to converse. And I wanted to say, you also need to make sure that everybody in your party has the 10 essentials. That everybody has a map or some other way of keeping track of where they are, that everybody has food and water and some kind of shelter. You can't put that on somebody else, because stuff, can happen.
And speaking of that, is it important to come up with like an emergency plan or a place to meet in case something goes wrong?
I think so. Some people, I think as people get more experience, they don't always hike lockstep together. Ralph and I do, but that takes accommodation of, well, it used to be for him having to walk slower than I did. But if you are going to say, well, you go on ahead, I'll catch up, you better be real clear about where that's going to be. I've had people say, well, how many down trees did you have to climb over to get down this trail? And I'd say 2, and actually it had been 8 because I hadn't paid attention to that. I'm just saying that when you're saying meet at the second tree, it's pretty easy to miss things. So we've always hiked together and not done, I'm going to, be a half a day ahead. But I mean, there are people that hike solo and they manage. So, it's doable, but you just need to be very careful that you have an understanding of where you are. And it's also important, I think, and was told once by someone, always know your fastest way out, because you may be planning on hiking today from here to there, but something could happen where you could, like wildfires that we have, and maybe you can't get through that way. You need to know where you are, like, oh, I could go this way and get out, or I could go that way. So I think you need to have a sense of more than just, going from point A to point B, just for safety reasons. If you're hiking with a small group and you need to leave the trail to, take a potty break, someone needs to know that you're doing that. You don't get all embarrassed and say, I'm just going to sneak off here, because that's a pretty risky thing to do. So always tell somebody either to wait for you or where you're going to be.
Are there any hiking supplies you would recommend, with global warming, the heat to avoid, heat exhaustion?
It's well, you need enough water, obviously, or a way of collecting it as you go and filtering it or purifying it, whatever is needed. And it's a good idea to drink plenty of water before you start the day, so that you're not working on a deficit before you have a chance to stop and take some more water. It's also important to carry some kind of tablets or something to replace the electrolytes, because you're not just sweating water, you're also losing salts. So you need to keep that balance going. When we were doing the Pacific Crest Trail in the desert, there were times that water was pretty far apart, and we knew that ahead of time. So Ralph actually drove down to where we were going to be hiking through a week or so ahead of time and buried water, and then took photographs of where that was, and noted the destination, so that when we came through later on, we could pick up our water supply that way. We also carry a hiking umbrella, and a hiking umbrella, for those that aren't familiar with them, it's kind of it looks like it's covered with some kind of metal, but it's a metallic looking finish, and it's to reflect the rays. And I have done a very informal testing of putting my regular small umbrella over a thermometer, putting the metal colored one over it also, and then just having it out in the sun. And there is a measurable distance between the heat that you're going to feel under the protective layer. So you're seeing them more and more as people are realizing that's a good thing to do. And we cherry pick the time that we go to try to avoid the worst of the heat. And like I said, I'm not a hot weather fan, so that helps.
That seems very wise. Thank you so much for sharing all those tips. And I want to open it up to audience questions. Folks, please feel free to either press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen if you would like to speak, or use the Q&A to enter any questions. It looks like we have another question about the trail. For the Camino, is a trail running shoe sufficient, or does one need a hiking shoe? Great question.
Oh, well, that's one of the big debates. But in the last, the first Camino that we did was in 2001. We were there for 9/11, and I wore boots. And actually, we had just a few weeks before we went on the Camino trip, come off the John Muir Trail, where I had worn boots. So I wore them to Spain, and I had nothing but problems with blisters. A few years later, we started hearing more about trail runners. And at that time, on the Appalachian Trail, that's what people were switching to. So I would say probably by 2015 or so, we started wearing trail runners. And that's what we've worn ever since. The only exceptions are when we did Kilimanjaro, we were required by the company to wear boots. When we went to Patagonia and we did the Torres de Paine circuit, which was also a backpacking trip, I wore boots, but Ralph wore trail runners, and I could have worn, but I didn't know how wet my feet would get, and I wasn't sure if that was a good idea. So yes, we are definitely advocates of trail runners, and on the Camino, I think they are perfect. I don't see any reason for anything else. I guess the exception would be if I knew I was going to do a route where I would be coming through snow for months on end. I might go back to boots, otherwise never. They're comfortable. You're lifting another pound or two less, every step you take. For me, they give plenty of support. There's none of the break-in period. We're all for trail runners.
And what about poles? Are those allowed on the Camino? Are those helpful?
Oh, yes. Now, the Camino is not a backpacking trip. It's quasi backpacking trip, I guess you'd say. You are carrying your backpack unless you have the service carrying your things for you. But you don't need to carry as much as you would on a backpack trip because you're not carrying, some people can't, but that's an exception. You're not carrying the food you would carry for going on, the John Muir for a week or so. And so you save that weight. Where was I? Oh, so, and you're not sleeping out. Most people aren't. You're staying in pilgrim shelters, they're called, or maybe you're staying in private accommodations. So you don't need a tent. You don't need a heavy sleeping bag and all that.
We had a hand up earlier, but I'm not seeing one raised right now. Whoever had their hand up, you want to raise your hand again? I can unmute you. Let's see. Oh, we have another question in the Q&A. Do you do trips hut to hut, like on the Mont Blanc circuit?
The Patagonia trip was like that. Trying to remember, I think we had maybe 6 stops, and they had small places they might have had a room or two that you could stay in, or you could camp outdoors. And so we did a combination of that on the, let me see. No, not quite like the Mont Blanc. Like I said, on the Camino trails, you're staying indoors one way or another. And the backpacking trips, you're staying occasionally. You get to stay in a small town, but mostly you're camped out.
Thank you for that. Could you close us out with a couple stories? I know it's probably hard to choose, but from your most recent book, just to give us a taste of some of these amazing women that you have featured.
That's kind of like choosing your favorite child.
Not possible.
It is so difficult. When I was going into this, I just had no idea how much fun it would be. And the stories I would hear. I love this is the most fun of any book I've ever written. But I did want to mention a few people. There were many people, many of the women were first. For example, Marcia Powers and Ken Powers, her husband, who live, I think it's in Pleasanton, they were the first people to walk the American Discovery Trail, which is a trail that's from Delaware all the way across and ends in Point Reyes. And they did that mostly camping, actually. And the American Discovery Trail is different than the Pacific Crest Trail, for example, because it's not a dedicated trail, but it's kind of combining existing trails in parks where possible, but it's also doing rails to trails when those segments are available, or it could be walking down the street of some small town. It's just however they could cobble it together to be this now official trail. And they were the first ones to through hike that in a year. And she also was one of the Triple Crown people. Elise Walker was the first African-American woman to receive the Triple Crown of hiking. And before she did the Pacific Crest Trail, the longest time she'd been out backpacking was 2 days. And she just decided, I'm going to do this, and she did it. Who else? Nancy Hubbard, whose middle name is, or trail name is Why Not? It's Why Not because she had been a successful dentist with her own practice for about 27 years. She thoroughly enjoyed her job. She liked her clients. She loved her staff. She was good at her job. But she said one day, I just got that I was reading another book about somebody else's adventures. And I thought, why not? Well, because I have a job. I have to go to work every day. I only get 2 weeks off a year. And she asked herself, well, but why not? So she quit that. And 2 years later, set out and did the entire Pacific Crest Trail. And since then, she's done the other and gotten her a Triple Crown. Another woman is a very good friend of ours. We hike with her all the time. Her name's Patricia Shafarsik. She did the Camino de Santiago. Mostly around here, she does shorter hikes. But she has gone on Wilderness Volunteers trips throughout the US 29 times, leading 20 of those trips. And they do such things as repairing trails, building trails, taking down barbed wire fences, all those kinds of things that trail maintenance people need to do, planting trees, pulling out invasive weeds. So, people combine their love of the trail. They do it in different ways. Some people are living out of their car doing trails. Other ones are, doing things that support the trail. And it's just been a wonderful experience to find out how these people are demonstrating their love of the trails.
Thank you so much for sharing those stories. And where can folks get your book?
Well, any bookstore can order it for you, and Amazon has it available. So yeah, that's easily done.
And what is your website?
My website is susandalcorn.com. My husband started, our first website was Backpack, because that's my trail name, Backpack 45. So you can find me at backpack45@yahoo.com. You're welcome to email me any questions, or you can look at that website that Ralph maintains about all the places and from his point of view. And that also, that and my own personal website now both have my monthly newsletter on backpacking and hiking. So
wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. It's really been a treat. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, the Sierra Club.
Good night.